I have, my name is indeed Beverloo. I've been a debater for since I was 16. I'm currently 31. I work in the Dutch Chamber of Audit currently. And well, today I'm going to teach you a bit about argumentation. We're going to talk about a couple of topics. I'm first going to try and get this one to begin. Can see the start of the presentation right now? Cool. And can everybody see the agenda right now? Awesome. That's something that went wrong in previous workshops that I've given online, that I was talking about 6 slides ahead and it never changed for the participants. So that's good to know. We're going to talk about a couple of things. We're first going to define what an argument is, and more importantly, what it isn't. We're going to talk about claims, what they are, how to use them. We're going to talk about reasonings and the different kinds of reasonings that you can have. And we're going to talk about the impact that you're going to prove with your arguments. And after that, we're going to look at a couple of examples. The first question is one that I want to open the floor to, and that is, how would you define an argument? What are traits that pop into your head, words that pop into your head when you hear the word argument? So a little bit of a word association.
Maybe making a point.
All right, making a point. Yeah, you're trying to prove something. What else? So when you're having an argument with someone, what are you trying to do?
So I think it's an argument is basically the pillars of your point of view. So you try to substantiate your view on the topic you're debating on.
Yeah. So basically, you're going to find reasons why something is true. And why do you want to find those reasons?
Because that will give more credibility to your point of view.
All right. And why do you want to give that credibility to your point of view? What is the purpose of that?
Well, most times you're trying to convince the other person that your point is correct, that your point of view is correct.
Yeah. So basically, an argument is basically a claim. So we heard that one, supported by reasons. So you basically, you claim something, that something is true, and then you actually give it reasons why that something is true. That is an argument. Now, argument has has 2 different meanings. One is an argument is a reason for something to be true, for a motion, a statement to be true. The other one is the exchange of ideas itself. So while you're having an argument, you basically bring multiple arguments. We're mostly going to be focused on the argument as like a part of the reasons that you're trying to convince someone. That's what we're going to use today. Another word for reasons is grounds. I'm going to use them interchangeably today. And later, and I will mark that point, we're also going to talk about grounds in a different way. You'll hear it when I say it. So one of the things that an argument is, it's intended to persuade someone. So it's also meant to persuade someone willingly. You're exchanging ideas and you're exchanging, exchanging ideas and you're exchanging, claims and reasons. So what isn't an argument? Clashing opinions in a yelling match. Basically, if you're just yelling at each other and you're not really planning on making the other person see your way, but you just want to blow off steam, that's not an argument, that's a fight. Also, using claims reasoning as a form of manipulation is also not an argument. What do I mean by that? Basically, I can ask someone, I think this painting is awesome. Do you also think that? They might say, no, I don't think that painting is beautiful. At that point, I could say, all right, but if you don't think it's beautiful, I'm going to beat you up. That's manipulation. It's threatening violence and has nothing to do with the subject, the painting itself. You have to have an audience. That audience could be someone you're debating against. It could be your friends. It could be a large group of people. It could be literally anyone. For an argument to occur, there has to be a second party you're talking to. Sitting in a room talking to yourself does not count. A person must offer the claims and reasons to others. Yeah, basically you have to be there in order to convince someone else. You can bring arguments in different ways. You can talk to people, but you can also write it down, even interpretive dance, whatever you want, but you have to find a way of communicating with someone else. And the way you're presenting arguments can also change how that argument will be perceived. You can basically, if you think back on what you learned last week, the way you say things, the emotion that you're inflecting into something can actually change how your audience will perceive it. You can, for example, say, there's currently a large group of refugees fleeing from a conflict coming towards our border. Or you could say, there are foreigners that are coming to our country. The way you say things, you might say the same, but the way you bring the argument is different. And the way it will be perceived as well. So, what else are arguments? In these cases, descriptions and explanations are arguments. So in this case, descriptions, for example, are, you could see that as, hey, I think that's an elephant because it's big, it's gray, it has a trunk, and it has large ears. Descriptions are arguments as well. Basically, you're describing what you're seeing. Explanations, it's an informative piece. Its goal is to persuade the given information is accurate. So basically, explanations try to create a common reality with your audience. Basically, you're trying to convince them that what you are saying is correct, and then work from there. Yeah. The other thing is that opinions are arguments. In the end, in debating, and basically what we see in real life now as well, facts don't really exist. They're merely opinions with a large enough consensus. So we can see this in the real life, like in the real world. We could, for example, say the Earth is flat. Like, we have plenty of evidence that it isn't, but if everybody in the world says the world is flat, then that becomes the fact. Then that is the prevalent opinion. A more controversial could be, for example, vaccinations aren't safe. If everybody agrees that the vaccinations aren't safe, then no one will take them. So facts are also, like, opinions and facts are basically the same. They're just opinions that have a very strong consensus. And when you encounter this, your first job is to create that common reality where you both can work from. Most controversial, for example, could also be Real Madrid is the best football club there is. Could be true, or Erasmus University is the best learning institution. It could be presented as a fact, but you might have a lot of people disagreeing with it. Yeah, an assertion alone is not an opinion. So basically, you can't just say like, I think that painting is ugly. All right, cool, but you have to give reasons why you think a painting is ugly before it really counts as an argument. Until that time, it's just a claim. Even personal opinions or preferences have some reason behind them to be an argument. Well, that's what I just said with the painting example.
Could I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I was wondering about what you said about all facts are only opinions with strong consensus. What about a priori knowledge?
So, what do you mean? Like,
for example, all bachelors are unmarried.
That really depends. If we start, if the consensus changes of what a bachelor is, so you can take this even to a more fundamental level. If people no longer consider that 2 is bigger than 1, you already have a difference in facts. And I know that's an extreme example. It will probably never happen. But you have to create this common reality. That's what I talked about with the common reality. You first have to establish what the facts are before you can bring arguments. Before you can persuade someone, because if you live in different realities, it's difficult. So yeah, there are some preconceived notions that probably everybody will agree on. But if somebody doesn't agree on it, then they have a difference of opinion. And you can basically tell them that it's a fact and you have to accept it. If they don't accept it, they don't accept it. That can be an extremely frustrating exercise, but it is theoretical that facts don't exist.
But at the moment, right now, isn't it the fact that all bachelors are married, so you can use that in an argument?
I'm sorry?
Now, you just talked about that all facts are only opinions with a strong consensus in the long run. But when I'm having now an argument, of making an argument, I can use the fact at the moment that all bachelors are married.
Yeah, all bachelors are. Did you say all bachelors are unmarried?
Yeah, a priori truth.
All right. It might, but if somebody comes to you and says, I'm married, but I consider myself a bachelor.
All right.
That's like, this is a very fundamental thing. Mostly in most civilized debate, you will not run into this. That somebody just completely denies, well, things that have been consented among everyone for a very long time. But it can happen. All right. Emotions, for example, are also reasons in an argument. Arguments support the use of rational thought. Emotions are often rational responses to different situations. If I see a tiger on the loose and I feel fear, then that is an argument to get the hell out of there. Emotions can be impactful and painful, and that gives them the reason for their claim. So basically, somebody can argue from their emotions and say, hey, but that makes me angry, sad, happy, whatever. Then you have to find out what are the underlying reasons for that emotion. One other thing is fundamentalisms are not accepted grounds. A fundamentalism is basically the idea that truth exists and cannot be discovered or debated. Because if like an idea that if truth would just exist, there wouldn't even be a debate about it. So you can't argue that, hey, I know something to be true, and therefore everyone must accept that it is true. Another thing is personality is not an argument. People often give extra trust to figures and authorities. So basically, we trust people when we look up to them. just because somebody holds an opinion or somebody makes a claim, just the person who they are is not part of the argument, is not a reason to believe them. They actually have to come with good reasons to believe them. Yeah, this can lead to misstatement, taken as truth without investigation. Basically, blindly following someone is a bad idea, and you should alert yourself to it when you're doing it. It's not an argument for or against a claim. Then we come to conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are not grounds or reasons in this case. They often require overturn of critical assumptions to create their argument. Mostly, when you're talking about conspiracy theories, is when there's an absence of evidence against something, then it's proof that it actually exists. So basically, we have never seen aliens, so they must be hidden. So the government must be hiding them from us. The theory is considered stronger when it lacks information. Basically, that means the fewer details we have, the more we can just fill in for ourselves. Conspiracy theories also disregard the uncertain. What that means is that everything has to have a purpose. So, for example, if there is a tsunami in Japan, then that's basically just bad luck happening. Like a tectonic plate at that point just decided that it would create a wave. But because there is so much loss of life, people look for more meaning and think that it's an attack by the American government, by the HARP project, or whatever. Or there are new weather installations that are trying to drown Japan, constructed by China, you name it. It also violates what is most likely. People think with massive impacts to have massive cause. So basically, when we see something happening that affects a lot of human lives, a large loss of human life, we immediately want to think that something massive has happened and not that there, for example, has been a small mistake. For example, Chernobyl was sometimes seen as an attack on, for example, on the West, or that was like started intentionally. It ignored that it was simply a stacking of mistakes. And use of negative evidence as positive evidence. So basically, whenever someone asks like, hey, did the government kidnap a lot of dogs? And then the government says, no, we don't kidnap a lot of dogs. At that point, that would be seen as like, see, they're denying it, so they have something to hide. And finally, and this is where a lot of conspiracy theories fail, is it's assuming great precision and coordination from people who are at the same time stupid and incompetent. Think of, for example, the New World Order. So on the one hand, they're this all-powerful organization, but they leave hints in every single video that some YouTuber can crack. So at the same time, they're super powerful and controlling everything. At the other time, a simple YouTuber can unravel them. So when you see that kind of arguing, when you see these kind of arguments, you're probably not talking to someone who who's properly arguing with you. You're talking about a conspiracy theory. Yeah, any questions so far? If there are none, I will continue. So basically, now that we know what an argument is and isn't, we're going to look at how do you actually construct an argument. For that, we're going to use the two-man model. Basically, it's the basic building block of every argument. You have a claim, that is in well, that's the same as the claim that we talked about before. Then you have a warrant. That's the reason why something is true. You have the ground. That is the fact or the analogy that makes the warrant more likely to be true. And then you have the impact, and that means that basically, what does your argument actually solve or have as consequences? For this, before we start with that model, we're going to talk about a couple of things, important terms. We're going to talk about motions or resolutions. Resolutions you probably know from the UN. Motions is basically the topic that you're going to talk about. You're either in favor or against it. We always assume that it's feasibly debatable, in the sense that there are usually more than two or more sides to a story. And they always begin with the phrase, this house. So that is something that came from basically the English government. They are called the House of Representatives, House of Parliament, I mean. It's a formal term, meaning either the group debating, that means the group debating the motion. So the motion would, for example, be this house would legalize prostitution. That means that you, as a person, are going to argue either in favor or against legalizing prostitution. Or this house believes that it is immoral for individuals who have met their basic needs to not donate any excess wealth to social programs. Then you're going to talk about, well, you're also going to argue in favor or against that. We also have the affirmative versus the negative. It's to argue in favor in the affirmative or against something. So again, you're for or against a motion. We're also going to talk about links. Links are sentences that you use throughout your speech or phrases that you use that connect different arguments, parts of a single argument or the motion to each other. So we're going to see that we're going to connect the claim to the warrant to the ground, and the ground to the claim. And after that, we're going to talk about, what's it called? After that, we're going to talk about the, after that, we're going to talk about the impact. So first of all, claims. That's the main point of an argument. A claim is simply the main point of an argument. The statement shows what the debater intends to prove. So for example, you have the motion, this house would legalize marijuana. The claim is legalizing marijuana will increase government spending. It shows what you intend to prove. Always stick to making it one sentence at most. And try to keep that sentence short. There are three goals of having of making that claim. The first is labeling. Basically, you want to make sure that people can follow you throughout your speech. If you label your claims, so if you say, firstly, I'm going to talk about, for example, that legalizing marijuana is going to create a government income. That means that your audience is then more primed to think, okay, that's what that person is going to talk about. And later when they think back on it, they're also going to remember it by those claims. You can also achieve it by numbering it. So my first argument is going to be about X. My second argument is going to be about Y, etc., etc. And it creates an easy way to refer back to your arguments later. So for example, you can, if you're in the middle of a speech and you want to quickly go back to your first argument, you can simply say, as I already have proven in my first argument, X, Y, Z. It's relating to the purpose of the argument. So basically, you're going to connect it to the motion. You're going to show how it's connected with the motion. Again, with legalizing marijuana, you're going to show that that will increase, legalizing it will increase government revenue. It also highlights the relevance of every argument to the audience. The other thing it should do is reinforcing the advocacy of the speech. The goals of a claim is also to be precise. You have to be specific. Otherwise, if you make it too vague, people will misinterpret it, what you are going to say. They're going to have expectations and you're not going to meet them. So a claim, so a bad example would, for example, be we should legalize marijuana because of the economy. Most people will probably think like, oh, because it's good for the economy for some reason. But your argument could also be the economy is doing so poorly, we can't catch a break. Maybe we should just legalize it and get high and relax about it. If you aren't specific enough, you will see that your audience might have different ideas of what you're going to talk about than what you're actually going to say. That results in your audience going against your grain of thought and becoming more hostile, so to say. So try to be precise. Make sure you manage the expectations of your audience with the statement of your claim. Another thing you want to do is narrowing down your claim. You want to qualify them. You want to do that when you want it to be easier to prove. When you want to be make sure that it's easier or harder to attack. If you claim too much, it's going to be difficult to win the argument. For example, all versus many. When you're making a claim about all people or all things are a certain way, what you're going to see is that your opposition is going to simply bring one counterexample and you've already lost that argument. Comparisons and superlatives, try not to make them too many of those. There's a large difference between being a good something and being the best at something. For example, I can say Feyenoord is a good football club. I can give arguments for that because all their players are paid. They're playing in a high league. They have a lot of sponsors, stuff like that. But if I claim them to be the best, there is more of a burden of proof there. I have to claim that they're better than everybody else. So when you're making a claim, make sure that you're just trying to prove something is good instead of comparing it to everything else. Then you also want to only bring the essential claims. So for example, with the legalizing marijuana example, it's important to remember that results are often not mutually exclusive. There are multiple ways for a government to create internal revenue. Legalizing marijuana is not the only way. It might not even be the most essential reason why you want to legalize marijuana. Another thing that you should try to really bring home is if the damage is in the future, people will see it as less bad. So try to pull it towards the now. For example, when looking at climate change, we already see like that are some bad things happening. The worst is yet to come. People would like to think about it, and people don't want to think about future problems. They want to think about now problems. So try to make your claim as close to the now as possible. Do be careful in not overqualifying claims because that can make your argument weak again, or it can make it so narrow that it becomes meaningless. For example, if you are supposed to defend abortions, for example, that you want to legalize them or have them completely legal, saying, okay, we want abortions only in the case of underage incestual sexual assault. That is too narrow a group, and you're not fully committed to the motion of legalizing abortion. Also keep in mind when somebody actually brings and says something that all things are X way or all things are Y way, they often mean most. Try to give people the benefit of the doubt there. And there are different types of claims. So for example, the first one are factual claims. They're an assertion that something is true or false. For example, the sky is blue. That is a factual claim. And a claim can be empirically measured, numerically, or logically. I've already said before that all facts are opinion with massive consensus. This is why you need this shared reality. So basically that you can finally claim something as a fact, because all participants need to agree with that fact. You have value claims. That's basically an assertion of the worth of something. That's my example of the football club. They can be good. They can be the best. They can do poorly. Painting can be ugly. And it often implies a moral, aesthetic, or ethically weighing two things against each other. Something is better than another thing. Or something is good compared to something else. When you're making claims and arguments, you're usually arguing against the status quo. And finally, you're going to make policy claims. A claim advocating for a certain course of action, for example, legalizing marijuana, should be done or should not be done. And you usually need more claims to support that claim. So you have subclaims and sub-subclaims, which basically, which will then create one big argument for example, a motion. Before we continue, are there any questions at this point about claims? All right. If you do have a question, feel free to interrupt me. Yeah. Let's see. It's now 1938. I would say that, yeah, we can go on a little bit longer. We're going to take a break in about 10 minutes. It's going to be a 10-minute break. So then reasoning. This is where we're going to use a different way of, a different meaning of the word ground. We're no longer talking about reasons. We're talking about warrants, which are the reasons, and grounds, which are basically the facts or the data that backs that reasoning up. You use both warrants and grounds to prove your claim. So a warrant is the reasoning of why a given claim is true. Without a warrant, the claim is only an assertion. We already saw before that an assertion alone is not enough to form an argument, and it is also referred to as analysis. So you're going to analyze, why is the claim that I just made true? So again, with the legalization of marijuana, this house would legalize marijuana. That's the motion. The claim is legalizing will increase government revenue. Why is that true? Because governments can place taxes on legalized marijuana. Warrants are a rule of inference. So basically they describe the way people see the world. They're usually not controversial and seated in common ideas. Again, this is where this common reality is important. They're based on general ideas or principles, not universal truths, as we had just seen. Fundamentalisms, so that a truth always exists in a certain way, are not part of arguments. The scope of the warrant is often beyond that of the current argument, so unlike grounds of claims. So basically, it's usually defending a principle, for example, that there should be a free market, or that we should create more options in the example of legalizing marijuana, more options of creating revenue. How do you phrase that? So basically, after you've given your claim, which is only one sentence, your warrant should immediately follow and specify, explain, or justify it. You can trigger yourself to do that by saying after every claim, this is true because, or this is the case because. If you do this often enough, you will no longer need that sentence, but especially when you're starting out making arguments, try to really take yourself on that, try to take yourself into that mindset of always asking yourself, why is this true? And then answering that. You also have to sometimes back a warrant. It means supporting the warrant, similar to grounds supporting a claim. Basically, there are sometimes sub-arguments. You have to explain, for example, if you would, in a motion, for example, let me think. Yeah. This house would allow the families of refugees to come in to move to the country where the refugee is currently staying without any further legal track. One warrant can be, we should do this because this will unite families. When you unite families, people will be happier. And then you have to explain why will they be happier. That is backing a warrant. So you keep asking yourself why questions until you can basically no longer think of anything. Then we move on to grounds. Grounds are reasons to support the claim by linking reasoning to the real world. That's, again, creating common reality. It does not make the argument true on itself, but it does strengthen your warrant. So it strengthens your reasons. Again, the motion is this house would legalize marijuana. The claim is legalizing will increase government revenue. And the ground for that is that you've read that in March 2009. It would yield 40 to 100 billion euros in tax revenue. You have a warrant why that's so great, why that is a good thing. Sometimes you will see that during a debate, during an argument, you only have a limited amount of time. So ideally, you want to give a ground for every argument and every claim you bring. But if you don't have the time, this is the first thing that you cut. And if you have to choose, only choose it for your most important. And we're going to later talk about what are important arguments in terms of impact. Only use them for those arguments if you are short on time. So types of grounds. Facts. Again, this requires a common reality, but usually you can come to a common reality and you can use facts. So it's any type of data derived from a direct source, include quotations, statistics, expert opinion. It's important to give with the proper context to be easily understood. So basically don't start quoting people out of context. Don't take numbers out of context. You see that happening a lot. To basically show that we have the facts on our side, and then you actually read the article that they got those facts from, and then that article is actually claiming the opposite of what they've been arguing. In a debate, or the kind of debate that we'll be doing, it's going to be difficult to give these types of grounds simply because you don't have the time to look them up. You only get 15 minutes to prepare your motion. And during a debate, you can't take out your laptop and show it to your opponent. You have to use your words alone. And often in real life situations, you will see the same. You can't casually when you're arguing with someone, you can't casually take out your phone, start searching for the relevant user data, and make your opponent wait for 10 minutes. One thing I want to stress, never lie or make up any facts. It's going to really hurt your believability, and it rarely makes the large impact that you want it to have. Examples, analogous data where someone has, where something has occurred similar to the world being described by the speaker, and it can include current or historical events, or realistic predictions of what's going to be happening. And one of the easiest forms of data, since it does not have to be directly related to the argument. So basically, for example, in the Netherlands, you're not forced to wear a helmet when you're on a bicycle. You could have the motion, this house would make bicycle helmets mandatory. And well, it's a lot safer for those people. Where have we seen that before? Well, an example here would be, a ground here would be seatbelts. At a certain point in time, everybody was in a car was forced to wear seatbelts. And it has drastically reduced the amount of deaths in traffic, and helmets could do the same thing. So those are examples. Try to think of when has the government, or when are there other real life situations in which something like what I'm claiming has happened, and is that applicable to my argument as well? Then you have personal testimonies, and that's basically what have you as a person experienced. Be careful with these, because in a debating setting, it could force your opponent to attack your experience, which makes it really awkward, because at that point you're attacking the person bringing the arguments and no longer the argument itself. So as a debater, you would be putting yourself in a very vulnerable position where you're open to attacks on your experiences and your way of seeing the world, or what you have experienced. Yeah, and it places an unfair burden on the opposition, because you are opposing someone's personal experience. I can see that it's almost time now. Before we start, yeah, there are different types of reasoning. So basically those are claims, warrants, and grounds. There are types of reasoning that you can use to actually get to your claims, get to your warrants, and get to your grounds. We're going to talk about those after the break. I suggest we take about a 10-minute break, and we're all back here at 8. All right? Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Is it never good to use your personal experience? Like, should you never ever use it, or can it sometimes be beneficial?
It has certain risks. So in the sense that when you're arguing, especially when you're debating, you're trying to create an emotional distance between you and the arguments, that if your arguments get destroyed, that doesn't affect you personally. If you bring personal experiences into your arguments, that's going to mean that the opposition has to attack those experiences, which can leave a very nasty taste in your mouth. So you can use them, it's just not advised. The other thing is that personal experiences might not be reflective of other data. So your personal experience might be an exception that only happens in like 0.1% of the cases.
All right. And because in politics, often politicians use like other people's experiences to illustrate like a certain point of view, and that's also not advised then, or because it's someone else's experience, you can use it.
If it's someone else's experience, then it's no longer a danger that you will be attacked, but that other person might be attacked. You might not want that either. And it can still be true that the data does have something different to say. So that in the larger picture, that experience turns out to be not true.
All right. Thank you.
All right, no problem.
Could I ask a question about what you said before the break?
Oh, yeah, sure.
It is about that personal testimonies can be problematic in a debate setting,
True.
and that you should be discouraged from use. And because this is a debating course, I want to ask a follow-up question about my original question. When I asked my question about a priori truth,
Yeah.
And that they are objective facts, you said it can be rejected by saying, I do not think that all bachelors are married. But isn't that a personal testimony that can be problematic in a debate setting?
Yeah. So basically, in a debate setting, you will often see that you have this common reality, right? Where all bachelors are unmarried. But you will also encounter, and that's more in real life, you will encounter people who reject that. And it might, like, bachelors are an extreme example, but there are people who don't trust data, who don't trust scientists and the scientific method, and who will argue against you from a completely different reality.
All right.
And at that point, you can have the facts and the usual consensus on your side. The fact that they are no longer agreeing with you means there is no longer a consensus. So yeah, in all practical applications, you're going to see that facts do exist. Data does exist. A priori knowledge is going to be relevant and is going to be, people are going to share a reality with you. But you have to assume that nothing is written in stone in a debate. Is that somewhat clear?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
All right, cool. Yeah, with that, I would like to continue with the second part of this workshop. We're now going to talk about reasoning. And reasoning is basically how you can come to conclusions from data. Types of reasoning uses premises, so basically observations or data, and you're going to create logical following arguments out of them. So it's reasoning is referring to the logic used in an argument. An argument correctly following logic is considered valid. And if an original premise is false, the argument can still be valid. So we have a couple of observations, but those observations can be wrong, can be flawed, and you can argue about that. But based on those based on those premises, argumentation can still be logical. And conclusion is sound or unsound depending on the truth of the original premise. So we have two terms here. We have valid, which means are we following the reasoning, and you have sound or unsound, which is are the premises actually true. The first kind of reasoning we're going to talk about is deductive reasoning. And it basically starts with general rules and then applying those general rules on a specific case. You have two premises here. There is no such thing as drought in the West. And with the West, I mean, Western civilization, as far as that exists. California is in the West. The conclusion is California never needs to plan to deal with droughts. Because if premise A is true and premise B is true, then the conclusion can be that they don't have to plan for droughts because there will never be droughts. This argument is valid in the sense that it's following the right kind of reasoning. It is logical. It's not a sound argument because there are droughts in the West. So deductive reasoning is going from general rules and applying it to a specific case to create your argument. The other way around is inductive reasoning. That is going with specific observations and creating a general conclusion out of that. This conclusion can be likely, but is not always certain. So, for example, you have three premises here: that the first coin I pull out from the bag is a 10-cent coin. The second I pull out of the bag is also a 10-cent coin. And the third coin I pull out of the bag is also a 10-cent coin. The conclusion is all coins in the bag are 10-cent coins. This is likely to be true, but doesn't necessarily have to be true, because it's statistically possible that you got the only 3 dimes out of it, and the rest is only euros. So yeah, in this case, for this example, the argument is valid because we draw a conclusion from different observations into a generalized way. And it's sound because we know that we pulled 3 10-cent coins out of the bag. A question for you guys is, how can we make this example unsound?
Yeah, it's like what you just said. You can be lucky and have drawn only the first of the only 3 coins. They're 10 cents.
Yeah, so basically, we might get very lucky. In order for something to become unsound, you have to change one of the premises. So in this case, if the first coin I pull from the bag is a 20-cent coin and the rest are 10-cent coins, my conclusion can no longer be that there were only 10-cent coins in that bag. That would make it unsound. Finally, we have abductive reason, which looks a lot like inductive reason, but is slightly different. You start what is known to be an incomplete set of observations. So you have observation 1, something happened, observation 2, and proceeds to the likeliest explanation for the group of observations. So this looks a lot like induction, but it's unique as it draws very specific conclusions. So it's talking about what has happened and no longer talks about the future. So in the previous example, we were talking about coins and what other coins there could be in that little bag. In this case, it's different because we're going to look at what has happened. So the premise is a person finds a newspaper ripped up on the floor. The second premise is, so the second observation is, the person's dog has been alone in the room all day. The conclusion, what's most likely to happen, the dog tore up the newspaper. So you have 2 facts and you're trying to link them together. This does not necessarily have to be right, but it's the most likely outcome. It could also have happened that the government makes you want to hate your dog, invaded your home, shred up the papers, and left again without a trace. That would be more conspiracy theory, unless you caught it on camera. But in that case, but it's not a very likely conclusion. It's more likely that your dog got hungry or was upset that you left and then tore into your newspaper. Is it clear what the types of reasoning are? All right. Then finally, so basically the reasoning is what you use to get your warrants, your grounds. So basically you can create arguments from the data you have in your grounds or from the examples that you have. That kind of is the kind of reasoning that you can use. Then we move on to impact. Basically, an argument has 4 parts. It has the claim, it has the warrant, it has the ground, And finally, it has the impact. And that is the reason why this argument is important. For every motion, there are probably hundreds of arguments, but there are only usually 2 or 3 that are so impactful, so important that you have to bring them. Impact describes why an argument should matter to the audience. If there is no impact, it's meaningless, because the audience will go like, huh, nice argument, so what? So it really has to answer, why is your argument important? The motion, again, as an example, this House would legalize marijuana. Legalizing will increase government revenue. The impact is increasing government revenue would have a positive impact on the citizens of the country, because the large amount of revenue would allow the government to help citizens in need of government services. So creating revenue sounds fun, but it's not really an impact. You have to show what that revenue can do, what it can mean for certain groups. When you're creating an argument yourself, it's beneficial to clearly state that the impact, what the impact is, by saying this is important after you have brought your warrant and your ground. So it's claim, warrant, ground, impact. And you do that by saying this is important because, or the impact of the argument is. There are more natural ways of bringing it, because this is a very debatey style. But this is a good beginning ground of getting better at always completing your argument and showing impact. It's always a benefit-harm analysis. They should be tangible, they should be specific. As I said, something creating revenue or people having more money is cool, but what can people do with that more money, or what can the government do with that extra revenue? And it's usually placed after the warrant to allow the audience to understand the reasoning. So first, people want to hear your opinion, then they want to hear why that's your opinion, and then they want to hear why your opinion is important. There are certain ways in which you can show impact of your argument. There is the pure number, so basically how many people are affected by something, and there is the severity, how big will the effect be? If an impact is the entire destruction of the universe, the impact is so big and incapable for a reasonable person to comprehend, it's not very effective. If an impact affects more but to a lesser severity, it's usually equal to an impact that affects less people but to a greater severity. What do I mean by that? So basically, you could give one person, like you could give 1,000 people €1. That is a large group of people, but with a very low severity. Or you could give one person €1,000. That's a very small group, but a very large impact for that person. It's also important to state when your impact will occur. It's very important that you make it as soon as possible. So impacts that happen tomorrow are way, way more important than impacts that happen in 100 years. Because your audience is not going to be alive in 100 years, so they will quite quickly have like, so what? A way you can undercut that thinking of so what is talk about their children, talk about their grandchildren. Because that makes the harm more real. Also, likelihood, an impact less unlikely to happen with large impact is often seen as better than an impact that will likely happen with less impact. So what do I mean by that? It affects an audience more if you say that one in, I don't know how many 100,000 people who get a vaccination get seriously ill and have to go to the hospital, than it is that practically everyone who gets a vaccination has a painful arm for 1 or 2 days. People like drama, and therefore the impact is bigger. And the best way to actually find your impacts of what's going to happen is to find people who are going to be affected by, for example, by emotion. It also depends on your audience. You've had that last week. If you have an audience full of economy students, economic indicators like what Wall Street is doing, stuff like that, is more interesting to them, but doesn't really mean a lot to your average Joe in the street. But if you say, hey, if Wall Street tanks, everybody loses their job, rising unemployment is also a number, but people no longer being able to provide for their families, that's a real impact. That's going to get people thinking. That's what's going to convince them. So try to make your impact as real as possible. Are there any questions currently about impacts? So try to make it as big as possible, so as many people as possible, as severe as possible. That is where you find the best arguments. So what does this model look like when you start making arguments? I'm going to claim that there are dogs nearby. I believe that because dogs are animals that bark and howl. That's my warrant. That's my reason why. And the ground is that I can actually hear barking and howling. The chance of that being something other than a dog, or maybe a wolf if you're in a forest, is going to be small. So it's pretty convincing that there are probably dogs nearby. Second example has all the different things we've talked about. So it has the motion, this house would legalize marijuana. The claim, legalizing marijuana will increase government revenues. Why will it increase it? Because governments can place taxes on legal goods and services. And the ground for that is that billions of dollars of marijuana currently sold illegally would be taxed. The impact of that is that the revenue would allow the government to provide more services to its citizens. So what you see here, these 4 statements basically, that constitutes one argument. And you basically have to do that for every reason you can think of why we should or shouldn't do something. Example 3, policies of today, this house would lower the required age to vote. So basically you can start voting at, I don't know, 14, 16. Policies of today affect today's youth more than those who are older. Government policy in a democracy reflects the needs and views of its citizens. And climate change's greatest effects will be 50 to 100 years from now. Impact is government policy will better solve long-term issues such as climate change. Final motion, final example 2. This house believes that developing nations need strong dictatorships. Dictators are able to get more things done faster by their government. Dictators do not have to deal with any bureaucracy. You know, the reason why is that dictators do not have to deal with any bureaucracy when implementing a policy. They can just say X is going to happen, and then X has to happen because they're a dictator. And the ground is that Singapore, an example, Singapore had a dictatorship until 1990 and was able to quickly develop. The impact is more programs or projects are able to be accomplished to better develop an economy. However, and this is something we're going to talk about next week, this claim might not be true. This actually goes for every claim I've made during the session. They might not be true. There are counter arguments to them. Dictatorships are riddled with corruption, which makes it harder for things to get done. Because you have to bribe everyone. You have to get like the right people at the right place. That also costs money. And you basically have to work very hard in order to get something done. Yeah. So I have shown you today that arguments, well, I've shown you what the boundaries of an argument are. I've also shown you what parts there should be to an argument. You have the claim, that is the statement that you make, having a value in it. Then you make the warrant or analysis to explain to me why that claim is true. After that, you give me a relevant example, and then the impact this is going to have on basically a group of people, economic indicators, stuff like that. And that forms one argument. Are there any questions about this model? Are there any questions in general? All right. Then I want to thank you for listening. I do believe that Jonah is going to take over now.
Yeah, can you go to the next slide quickly? Yep. Thank you, Eric. Well, first, thank you so much, Eric. That was a wonderful lecture. This is definitely, so everyone, this is definitely probably going to be the densest lecture, since it's a lot of terminology and a lot of new concepts about these very technical and formal things about debating. But it will become very critical very soon once we start actually having debates. To be able to have a good argument, you need to have all of the different parts of an argument that Eric has gone over today: claim, warrant, ground, impact, and those things which people often miss when they make arguments who are not experienced debaters is what makes the difference, and what makes some people sound like really make very good arguments and are able to become very convincing. So to continue on what we then learned today, there is going to be a workshop Thursday, this week, January 13th, from 7 to 8:45. Check Canvas just like last week to be able to see what group you're in. Everyone is in different groups compared to last time, so you'll be able to work with new people this time. And also in there will be the Zoom link, since this week is still fully online. Good news is that in preparation, you'll have to do very little. All you have to do to be able to participate is just maybe look over these two general topics. The first is inheritance tax, and the second is compulsory voting. During the workshop, you're going to be able to get motions, so a specific topic, on these two general subjects to debate. And what you're going to do is you're going to make arguments throughout the class. You're going to go off with partners, build arguments, and then come back in the main group and share what arguments you created for both sides of the motions. So all you have to do, just be generally familiar with these two concepts, just enough to be able to make arguments about it for either side. And then from that, there'll be more information posted on Canvas specifically about how the workshop will work. Is there any questions? Oh, yes, Eric, go.
Yeah, so you don't have to become an expert on inheritance tax. That's like a whole study of its own. Don't worry about that. Just know what it is and maybe how some countries do it. So you don't have to know percentages, just how is it generally done?
Yeah, just have
same for compulsory voting.
Yeah, no, please do not come with any lists of facts or figures. Just have an understanding of what those terms mean and just generally how they work, as Eric says. Is there any questions about this that anyone has? Or in general for Eric?
Nope.
Okay, well, if you end up having a question about the workshop or about anything covered today, you can definitely shoot an email at debate.workshop@eclipse.nl. and I can forward any information to Eric. Eric will also be one of the trainers running a workshop on this Thursday. And thank you guys all so much for coming today, and I hope you guys learned a lot. Have a good evening, everyone.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for being here.